What's going on, everybody? Today we are breaking down all things about the 2025 Los Angeles Chargers, including how high is too high to draft Ladd McConkey in fantasy football land. Could we see a monstrous year-one workload for first-rounder Omarion Hampton? Can Justin Herbert get back to partying in the box score like his 2021 again? All that and much, much more here on today's Fantasy Life show. Of course, I cannot accomplish this alone. Accordingly, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland, joining me to make it happen. Mr. Dwain, I hope you are well, and I'll start you off with a question. How high is too high to draft Mr. Ladd McConkey this year?
Probably. I mean, I think the only limit you can set is round one because it's so loaded. But once you're out of round one, like I think Ladd McConkey's in play. I'm taking Achane over him. I'm taking Drake London over him. But once you get past those names, A.J. Brown, like I think it's really close between him and Ladd. Like I've kind of gone back and forth between. I've drafted both of those two in the middle of the second round. But look, man, he had a really good first season. He was a wide receiver 2 with 14.9 PPR points per game, 2.38 yards per route run. So the underlying data also matching up. That's wide receiver 1 worthy. 28% targets per route run versus man coverage, 20% versus zone. So Ladd's a guy that was really just doing everything, Ian. And if you look at him, once he got the full-time starting role, which didn't begin until week 3, that's when we saw him up over the 80% route participation mark. Listen to these numbers, okay? Week 3 through the wild card game, 16.9 fantasy points per game. That's a wide receiver 1. 26% target share. That's a wide receiver 1. 10.9 ADOT. So for those folks that think that Ladd might be this gimmicky just underneath guy, no, this guy's working intermediate. He can beat you over the top. He can do it underneath. He can really uncover in a lot of ways. Actually accounted for 31% of the air yards for the team. Like an elite number there is like closer to 40%, but 31%, still a really strong number. And man, 20% of the end zone targets, right? Like a lead is like 30%, but 20% for a guy that's not really that big. I thought that was great as well. So,
and Dwain, on those end zone targets, dude, the trust was unreal. He had 2 of those where just like defender back to Herbert, threw it anyway and snagged it. He's a beast.
Yeah, dude, he plays really well. And to your point, it's the trust that he and Herbert have. Like they know they are hand in glove. He knows where McConkey's going to be. They have a feel for the way that the coverage is unfolding in front of them. And guys, like if one of the funnest things to watch, honestly, going back through all the guys that I've been watching, trying to get my eyes on them, as many of them as I can through the offseason, spent a lot of times on the rookies, but man, went through some McConkey stuff about a week ago. Ooh. And that was an absolute joy. Watching Justin Herbert and McConkey operate down the stretch is like the opposite of what it looked like to watch Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. Not to catch a stray from Marv, but man, like just watching these two guys, it's like you said, Ian, it was pretty special. So I'll say this, like, we've talked about it multiple times, but it is so loaded. If we didn't have Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. and Nico Collins and all these young, like really, stud wide receivers sitting there at the end of round 1 in a different run out where McConkey breaks out, 3 or 4 years ago, he might be a late round 1 pick. But right now, because fantasy is so loaded up top with these young stars, he's a mid round 2 pick, which, man, I'm very happy to click on his name as much as I can.
I will say, I think he's in the tier with those names, though. I mean, we saw him outperform those guys during the second half of last season. From week 8 through the playoffs, I know it's a little bit of an arbitrary sample, but look at the ones we pull out for BTJ and these other guys. It's the offseason, people. This is what we do. 19.2 PPR points per game during that stretch. That's wide receiver 5 status. Only Jamar Chase, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, and Amon-Ra St. Brown were able to do better. You mentioned the yards per route run, Dwain. I mean, the company is just littered with guys that we absolutely loved and still love mostly in fantasy. Going back to 2014, top rookie seasons in terms of yards per route run: Odell Beckham Jr., special; A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, Brian Thomas Jr., Chris Olave, Rashee Rice, and in 9th place, yes, Ladd McConkey. Tyreek Hill rounds out the top 10. Again, pretty awesome company. And again, I think the concern here is the fact that the Chargers, Greg Roman, Harbaugh, obviously used the first-round pick on Hampton, brought in Najee Harris. It makes sense if they go a little bit more run-heavy, I think, this season. That's why I'm personally, keeping McConkey more so at that wide receiver 10, wide receiver 11 spot. But, man, Dwain, like, if we did have equal targets between Neighbors, BTJ, and McConkey, who's to say Ladd couldn't be the number 1 guy of that group? I think he's every bit as good as them. Right now, though, I do lean Neighbors and BTJ ahead just because, again, I think that target ceiling is a little bit higher.
Yeah, and they also had they had slightly stronger prospect profiles coming out. So like if we're just stacking things up, but I am with you. Like, would it surprise me after this year that we're ranking Ladd McConkey right next to those guys, potentially past some of those names we talked about before? Like, no, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's why I think it's crazy that you get to draft this guy in the middle of round 2 right now. And I get it, maybe a little bit more run heavy offense, but you also get to play with Justin Herbert, man, and your target competition. Like, who is it going to be? Like, we've got an old Mike Williams. We've got Trey Harris, who we're hopeful for. But, guys, he was an okay prospect in the Super Bowl, right? Trey Harris could end up being something. But at the same time, like, do I think he's an immediate threat to Ladd McConkey? Not really. We don't really have a tight end. We've got Tyler Conklin playing there. Like, I mean, he's a fine, like, just average NFL starter. But right now, I mean, when I look at this depth chart, man, and the pecking order for the way the targets could play out, given what Ladd did as a rookie, looking at that locked in nature that he has with Justin Herbert, and then just this competition, I just don't see a way, man. I don't see a way that, he doesn't just put up, a 25, 26, 27% target share again.
We'll give Trey Harris, some credit. I know you weren't trying to diss him or anything. He has gotten a lot of steam, though. I mean, second-round pick for a reason. He had over 1,000 yards in just 8 games last season. Number 1 in the class in yards per route run versus man and zone. But, man, if you guys went back and watched some of that Jackson Dart film, again, we saw some great plays. Ole Miss is a great program. They recruit at a very high level under Lane Kiffin. They've seen plenty of great talents, even at wide receiver with AJB and some of those guys coming to the NFL. There are a lot of fluking stuff going on, okay? A lot of great play calls, a lot of, spreading out the defense. Not a whole lot of things I think are going to exactly replicate at the next level. So, yeah, I'm with you, man. Trey Harris is someone who, honestly, I think is fine going next to, like, Kyle Williams, now wide receiver 55, wide receiver 60 range. But I don't see him as someone who's going to be a threat to McConkey or anything like that. Any thoughts on Quentin Johnston? He was someone that was more or less, left for dead in the fantasy streets after the disappointing rookie season, but did come on strong last year in the most Quentin Johnston way possible. Had 186 yards in week 18. No one watched it. In the playoff game, he just goose-egged as soon as he was on primetime TV. So, again, has his flaws. I will say, from watching his catches, several were of the wide-open defense forgot he existed variety. Maybe that was his plan by dropping all those passes all along. Chestnut checkers there. But have you been clicking Quentin Johnston late? Because, again, for a guy who scored more PPR points per game than Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, not getting much respect in the fantasy streets at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's pretty wide open. Like, just real quick on Trey Harris, he was the wide receiver 7 this year in the rookie supermodel. He graded out at he got a rating of 72. If you look at the hit rates on that, in the first 3 years, 28% of those guys go on to be top 24 wide receivers. 39% go on to be top 36. So that's what I mean. There's a chance for Harris, like, to pop, right away. But again, the odds on players that rated, in that range, it's kind of tough. And it's just harder for wide receivers. Ian, we talk about this a lot. Like, talent is such a huge differentiator for wide receivers. You draft a running back early, and all you basically have to do is the coaches decide, we're going to give him the ball because we invested in him. And for the most part, good things can happen. Now, better things can happen for really good running backs that get those touches. So we're not saying there's not a difference between those things. But for receivers, it's just different because they have to go out, they have to beat the coverage, the quarterback has to trust them. There's all these other things. And then you just mentioned it, Quentin Johnston. We also have Mike Williams. Like, there's potentially a rotation between all these guys for the other 2 spots. But to your point, for QJ, did do some nice things last year. Basically, though, just really looking at the underlying data, be interested in getting your thoughts, and also watching some of the film of him when I was watching Ladd McConkey. Just hasn't quite developed really into that multiple, like, layer field player that I had hoped. We always knew that he was a good yards after the catch player when you could get him the ball, but it really feels like right now at this point in his NFL career, he's still more of like I don't want to say complete gimmick player, but it feels like you got to scheme him up space, right? And then get the ball to his hand. Which is weird because he's a huge dude. This is a super huge human being that you would think would be able to do more in contested catches and things like that. But it just hasn't played out that way. They don't go down the field to him that often. One of his biggest plays last year, he was just left wide open. Not going to take it away. I get it. Those things happen. He's really good with the ball in his hands. The problem is, can he get to a level where, because Herbert does not trust him the same way. Like, when you see what Herbert does with McConkey and then you watch what Herbert does with Quentin Johnston, there's clearly something going on with the chemistry with those 2 guys. So I take it as a positive that, look, at least you can do something when you get the ball. This is the NFL, not easy to do. But right now, I think he's a guy that you got to scheme up.
again, some of these blown coverage plays happen to a lot of players throughout the league. But man, if I had my hands on some of the fantasy point data, PFF Ultimate, I'm guessing QJ had more than just about anyone. 8 touchdowns on 91 targets last year. Again, I just have a hard time believing that's going to fully repeat itself. But again, do you want to give him some credit? Because clearly he's proven capable of being a starting NFL wide receiver, albeit I'm not exactly betting on, that era to continue going up ahead of year 3. Pretty much writing off Mike Williams. I used to love drafting Big Mike, man, but man, last year, obviously the Jets situation was kind of doomed from the start, had a lot of mouths to feed there once they signed Devontae Adams. That was going to work out. But to go to a Steelers squad that clearly wanted him to become this, deep ball threat alongside, George Pickens and everything, to see him do absolutely nothing out there, I just have a hard time believing he's going to be doing too much. When you have a guy like Big Mike, who again has just won more times than not throughout his career on physicality, being that 50-50 contested catch turns into 75-25, you take away just a little bit of explosiveness from age and that knee injury. Not someone I'm exactly betting on a rebound. Dwain, how about you?
No, I mean, the one big year, honestly, that we had out of Mike Williams, his role was completely changed with the Chargers, and they let him run more intermediate routes. And he kind of was the Michael Thomas that year of their offense, and he was really good in fantasy. But to your point, other than that one outlier year, he's been more of a down the field ADOT type of player. So unless they decide to use him in a different way, like it is a bit limiting. I think it is him and Trey Harris actually battling each other for probably a spot to be the vertical threat, and potentially Quentin Johnston getting to stay on the field more as somebody they can scheme up and do some of the underneath things. Again, it could work out as a 3-way rotation for those other 2 spots that McConkey isn't locking down. But I'm with you. I was hoping for more. I mean, we could give Mike Williams a little bit of an excuse coming off the injury, but man, at his age, I've just kind of found making excuses for injuries as these players get older, especially if the archetype you're talking about hasn't really been a winning formula for me in the past. So yeah, haven't been clicking on Mike Williams' name. Maybe got a couple of shares late on some teams where I took Justin Herbert.
Just a 1-year, $3 million deal too. So it doesn't really sound like the Chargers are necessarily expecting too much out of him either. Let's get into the running back who, yes, the Chargers are expecting plenty out of after getting him in the first round. It is time for the Fantasy Crystal Ball presented by DraftKings. All right, Dwain, start rubbing your crystal ball, man. What's a realistic year 1 workload for Mr. Omarion Hampton?
Well, I've got him projected for 57% of the team's attempts. Now, how that works out, Ian, is probably first half of the year, 40 to 45, maybe 50%, with Najee still getting a big chunk. But what you're hoping for is that by the time we get to, week 9, 10, we're headed towards the fantasy playoffs, and you guys are all in first place in your leagues, 65% could be what it could look like. Now, again, put all that together, I've got him at 57%. I've got him at a 42% route participation with an 8% target share. People are like, what does all this mumbo jumbo mean, Dwayne? It means a floor of 9.5 fantasy points per game in a PPR. Ian, 12.3 is the median projection, but an 18.3 ceiling. And I think the way you can kind of play it out is you're leaning towards being towards that 18.3 as you get to the end of the year. I will say with Hampton, most likely it's just a matter of when, not if, this player breaks out. If we look at him based on his supermodel rating of 79, that's the 10th all time for running backs going back to the 2017 class. If you look at the comps, and this is over their first 3 years of their career, 27% of them have gone on to be top 6 running backs. So the guys that we just absolutely love, but 73% of them went on to be top 12 running backs. So running back ones. And then 91% went on to be top 24. So running back twos. So he just sits in a group that has over time ended up really producing in fantasy. It's just a matter of, will it be this year? And is it right away? Do we have to wait for it? Or is it really more a year 2 breakout? Because there is a chance, I have to say, and that's where that floor scenario comes in, right? Of 9.5 fantasy points per game. The floor scenario is that Najee does manage to stay involved. And I can hear all the people right now thinking, oh my God, just sighing, Dwayne, how's Najee Harris? He's not explosive. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. And we know it, guys. We agree with you. All those things are working against Najee Harris, but at the same time, he is a big back that we've seen multiple coaching staffs trust with a full workload. They know they can put him out there on passing downs. They know they can hand it to him inside the 5-yard line. In a pinch, they know that he can catch the ball out of the backfield. This is a former number 1 first-round pick as well out of Alabama. So I'm leaning into Omarion Hampton, Ian. I'm drafting plenty of him, but I do think we have to acknowledge that there is a scenario that plays out where Najee just stays more involved than what people think that he will. Now, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here and get people off Omarion Hampton. Again, I am drafting him, but I think we have to acknowledge the full range of outcomes. I don't think we can just put our head in the sand.
The concerning thing with drafting him right now is I feel like we're drafting him almost purely for that hopeful second half upside. He's going to the RB15 right now, Dwain, and he's someone where, again, if you want to try to put reasonable projections, I think it's going to take a lot to try to get him up that high. So, yes, it is Najee Harris, but look at who we're dealing with right now with Greg Roman, okay? Greg Roman sat there in Baltimore and watched J.K. Dobbins average 6 yards per carry as a rookie, and he went ahead and gave Gus Edwards more total rush attempts anyway. So, Gus Bus, special play in my heart. He was averaging 5 yards per carry that year too. But old man Mark Ingram was also involved and had 72 carries on that team. So that was more of a 3-back system. Dobbins didn't have the round 1 draft capital. It's not a 1-for-1 takeaway or anything. But this is a team that even last year, man, with J.K. Dobbins emerging as their clear-cut number 1 running back, with Gus Edwards being someone who was banged up and or ineffective throughout most of the year, didn't exactly see them just hand the backfield over to one guy. Again, maybe didn't have the one guy like an Omarion Hampton that you can trust, but just some of the takeaways, man. Like I see people believing in Hampton because of that, pretty cool picture of just how big he looks next to, some of these other Chargers guys. Look at Najee Harris. Like that is a massive human being as well. So some of the coach speak we've gotten from Roman is highlighting both Harris and Hampton out there. And yeah, he's just being nice to his players. These guys aren't going to put down their running backs in the media. Even gave Kamani Badal a shout out. But for me, man, it's nothing to do with dynasty. I'm in a league where I really needed a running back, and I actually took him ahead of the wide receivers early on inside the top 3. So I'm fully on board with investing for Hampton in the future. But man, just for 2025 redraft, I have not been buying much of that RB15 price. It does scare me a little bit. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I've bought quite a bit, but it's because, again, of the rookie supermodel profile. I know what the ceiling that I just gave you is really based on the idea that he's having to share time with Najee. If he did somehow come out and just get 65, 70% of the workload, like at the drop of a hat right away, starting in week 1, I mean, we're talking about a player then, if I were to put that in the model, we're talking about a guy with probably 22, 23 point per game upside because, he's going to be young at the very beginning of his career, got the fresh legs, he's explosive, all those things we're looking for on a team that we know likes to run the ball. So the upside is certainly there. But to your point, like there's really no way for us to predict which way it's going to go. So if you're going to make your bet on Omarion Hampton, I don't think you're wrong. Like I think it could be the type of bet that could really pay off big for you. But like Ian said, you got some other guys going in the range there right next to him, like Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, not as exciting as far as a talent profile, but you feel pretty good about what Chuba Hubbard's going to get in his offense. We talk about Joe Mixon. Yes, Nick Chubb did arrive, but I mean, Mixon's been pretty good. We talk about James Cook. Yeah, he's in a part-time role, but we've already seen him actually score fantasy points. So, I mean, Hampton's going in a range where I get why some drafters are shying away. You and me, Ian, we're going to draft hundreds of fantasy teams, and so I'm mixing all these guys up. But if you are just going to play in one league, I will tell you this. If I take Hampton, right, and I've got to take him round 4, round 5, depending on where you're drafting, I am circling back around and I'm grabbing a guy like James Conner, who, like, guys, go check out our Cardinals preview edition. Yeah. But as usual, James Conner, getting disrespect, going too late. There's a lot of other names you can come back around to get. So what I think this comes down to for me, Ian, is draft strategy. I know that Omarion Hampton, if everything goes right, does actually give me something that the other running backs going around him don't give me, which is probably that league-winning upside. But if you do it, you need to circle back around and grab someone else because, you might go through a 4 or 5 week stretch where you're just like, man, I can't even put Omarion Hampton in my starting lineup to start the year. So you really need to think about those things. Where I've liked him most, Ian, is whenever I've started like with 3 wide receivers and I'm like, man, I want to swing big on my running back, and I get Hampton, but I take him because I can come back and get a guy like James Conner. I can circle back around and take a guy like David Montgomery, some of these other guys that we feel better about what their touches could look like early in the season. So I think it comes down to you have to plan out the way you want to handle your draft strategy if you want to take Omarion Hampton, because he's going to cost you guys.
I will say I'd be more inclined to take him in redraft if you have any sort of keeper, stuff going on. Najee Harris only on this 1-year deal. And I did numbers a couple years ago, but historically we do see rookie running backs have a nice little leap up in the fantasy draft capital. I should say leap down. They go a lot earlier in drafts, in their second season. And in this specific case, again, it does seem like Najee could be on more of a 1-year sabbatical in Los Angeles as opposed to more of a long-term deal. Speaking of Najee, Dwain, he is going RB 36. He's in this range with guys like Zach Charbonnet and almost like the, Ramondre Stevensons of the world, where they could actually low-key give you that flex with benefits appeal, right? Where, no, you're not going to feel wonderful about starting Najee Harris, in week 1. I get it. But, man, wouldn't be shocked if even in a 2-headed committee, we do see him return top 36-ish numbers. That's where he's being drafted. And God forbid something happens to Hampton, man. It might not be as sexy if Hampton was the lead back as if we get Najee out there. But I'm also not ready to say that Najee couldn't make this work. If he's being fed 20-plus touches in this offense, it's not like in Pittsburgh, man. He was just being gift wrapped the ultimate opportunities, the ultimate, offense to succeed in. I know Jaylen Warren did his thing there, but, we've seen a lot of scat backs. Not to put down Jaylen Warren, we've talked through this, okay? But let's face it, Warren's facing lighter boxes. He's being put in positions to, rack up better advanced metrics than Najee necessarily was. Look, I was a lot more in on Najee, obviously, before they drafted Hampton in the first round. That's the way fantasy football and life worked. But, man, when I was going through free agency, Dwain, it shocked me, bro. Najee Harris not easily, but has better advanced numbers than David Montgomery across the board in their first 4 seasons. Montgomery was on a Bears team that ranked 15th in rushing yards before contact per carry. Najee's Steelers have been 28th over these last 4 years. So you mentioned he had the first-round capital back in the day. He's caught 70-plus passes in the season before. He doesn't have the most juice in the world, but go back and watch some Najee Harris highlights from last season, people. I'm telling you, he makes more big plays than you remember. I know he had the years where he wasn't very explosive. That was not last season. This dude made a lot of big plays. So thoughts on, again, maybe not just even Najee himself, but the Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevensons, and even Zach Charbonnets of the world, because, man, they're going after the top 50 wide receivers. If you already got your QB and tight end, I feel like that's a pretty decent bang for your buck.
Yeah, and I think early in the season, like, you probably do get some standalone value from Najee. I haven't drafted him a ton, but having said that, I've been drafting more best ball. Like, I'm not drafting like redraft leagues right now. Like, we're about to get into those streets, but I'm thinking more about what's that late season upside look like. I'm locked into these players. I can't trade them. I can't move them. I get, just like I think Omarion Hampton could gain steam as the year goes on. Well, I think that probably means that Najee Harris loses steam as the year goes on. So while I think over the first few weeks, you might feel pretty decent about Najee Harris. And if you're in a league where you can move him or trade him, well, then you even have that option open to you. But if I'm playing in a best ball league, I'm not taking him that often. I think more of his value will probably come down to being contingent, like once Omarion Hampton gets going. Again, though, guys, there's a range of outcomes. I could be wrong. They could split this pie like down the middle. Like that totally could happen. To your point, you talked about Greg Roman and how good J.K. Dobbins was, and he continued to just give the ball to Gus Edwards anyway. So we know that we've got a coaching staff that's also done that. And, from a historical standpoint, we've also got years going back with Harbaugh, where he continued to feed Frank Gore. I can't remember who the younger back was that was behind Frank Gore at the time.
Carlos Hyde?
But I know Gore kept. Yeah, I think it was Carlos Hyde. Yeah, of course you would remember. It's Ohio State, baby.
Yeah, baby.
So. Yeah, whenever we look at these two coaches, they've both done it, right, historically. So there's a chance that it could happen. I will say this, though, that if, like, Hampton, for whatever reason, got in the doghouse or Hampton were to miss time, Najee Harris, and again, like you said, he was better than what people think last year. But even if you don't think Najee's a great player, what you can say about him is he has a 3-down skill set. He is the type of player that does not have to leave the field. And if he suddenly found himself alone, I don't really think anyone like Kamani Vidal or someone like that is really going to be challenged in this dude for looks. And people can talk about, lack of upside and all that. I'll tell you right now, if Najee is in a role where he's getting 70% of the workload for the Steelers, at worst case, you're looking at a high-end running back too. but you could be looking at a running back one. I mean, we are talking about an offense that likes to ground and pound the ball. We're also talking about an offensive line, Ian, man. 4 out of the 5 starters are former first-round picks, 3 of them taken by the Chargers. They added Mekhi Becton. I know he's had his challenges, but guys, go watch Mekhi Becton, like in one-on-one matchups, blocking people. This dude can be an absolute mauler. So I'm not surprised that Harbaugh would go out and add him to the team. But yes, I'm the contingent value is like where I could be wrong about Najee, man. Like if for some reason Hampton was to miss time, I do think Najee's good enough that he could pay off a lot of value versus where he's going right now in drafts.
Because, again, there was a month-and-a-half stretch where Hampton wasn't here yet. It looked like Najee was going to be the RB1, and he projected and was ranked very favorably to guys like Joe Mixon, Kyron Williams, fellow workhorse running backs who aren't going to be ranking anyone's top 5 here anytime soon. But, again, volume tends to rule all in fantasy football. Sure seems like Hampton and Najee one injury away from potentially going loco in these streets. So, again, guys, we'll see what happens, but this has been the Fantasy Crystal Ball presented by DraftKings. Wimbledon is almost here, and the excitement is building with the game's biggest stars set to battle it out on the sport's most iconic stage. Every serve, volley, and rally could make history. Get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, new customers who bet just $5 get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Whether you're backing a top seed or hoping for a Cinderella story, now is the perfect time to make your pick. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. All right, Dwain, let's talk some Justin Herbert, someone who came into the league in 2020, had one of the most prolific rookie seasons we've ever seen from a fantasy points perspective, 22.2, good for QB7 status in that year. Sophomore campaign, another 22-plus fantasy point season. That was good for QB2 honors. This man looked like he was ready to take over. Since then, QB15, QB10, QB13, hasn't even reached 18 fantasy points. So still very much believe he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. No, you can't rank him in the top 4. If you want to rank him closer to 10 and 5, that's fine. There does need to be some, just reality of what have you done for me in the biggest moments in the playoffs. And I know things haven't gone great for him there. That said, Dwain, do you think from a fantasy perspective, Herbert can get back to partying like the first 2 seasons of his career?
Well, I mean, the big challenge, like you mentioned some of the good things, like over his first 2 years, averaged 292 yards passing per game. Like, I'm sorry, you don't do NFL if you're not good. Averaged 2.2 passing touchdowns per game in those years, and also pretty good on the ground. 17 rushing yards per game, averaged 22.7 fantasy points over those first 2 seasons. Last year, as you guys can see here on the screen, those numbers dropped significantly, but the big difference, Ian, going back to year 1 and 2, 43.5 dropbacks per game. Last year, 34. I mean, so we're talking about almost 10 dropbacks less per game than what this guy was getting whenever this was a pass-first offense. Also, you had Mike Williams still really more in his prime on those offenses, along with Keenan Allen. So you had these 2, proven weapons that were out there doing their thing. So, and I know you'll probably throw something in here about Gerald Everett wearing a visor, which always does look really cool. But whenever you look at last year, they were still a 1.3% dropback rate over expected. So it's not like this team went to like this crazy run heavy sort of style. The big issue, minus 8% plays per minute over expected. They had 1.96 plays per minute. That was last in the NFL. So it was really more of a pace thing than just like what they're around the league average, right? For the drop back rate over expected. So we just, can we run the offense like just a smidge faster, guys? I mean, because 34 dropbacks per game, it's going to make it tough. As good as we know, that Justin Herbert is. So, but let's say we got some positive progression in that category. I think it then does come back to the pass catchers. I think we would need one other player besides McConkey to step up, right? Maybe it's Trey Harris, maybe it's Quentin Johnson, maybe it's Mike Williams. At least there's 3 options there. If we can get one of those other guys to step up along with McConkey. The other scary part, man, is if you ever have to go a stretch of games without Ladd McConkey, this passing offense pretty bad really quick. And to your point just earlier, we know they've invested in the running back position. They've got an offensive line. They could just lean even more to the run in that scenario. So I'm going to say no, he does not get back to partying like it's 2021. But anytime we talk about these players, the number one ingredient is talent. How good is the player themselves? And Justin Herbert does have the talent to unlock that. So you know what happens when the NFL season gets going. Game scripts could push it in his favor. The coaches could just change their mind and be like, Justin Herbert's a badass. Let's just let him throw the ball. There's lots of things that we aren't always the best at predicting. The number one thing is knowing that Justin Herbert is really good at football, and that could unlock ceiling that we're not projecting right now.
QB 17 right now in early ADP. Jordan Love's right there at QB 18. Two guys that have actually put on top 5 performances in Fantasyland over the course of a season. Another reason why, again, guys, if you don't get the first go round at quarterback, especially in 12-team leagues, and you're under, a reasonable assumption that guys aren't going to be taking 2 or 3 quarterbacks and screwing you over, feel free to wait, because again, the difference between QB 10, QB 11, and QB 18 really do feel like it's smaller than ever this year. If Herbert does really start to be leaned into more as a rusher, maybe that could be the breakout. I mean, he did rush for a career high 306 yards last year, despite having the preseason ankle sprain, and then early season high ankle sprain, and then the preseason plantar fasciitis. Do you know how to say that, Dwain? It's a tough one. The foot problem. Tough one.
Yeah, he had a foot problem.
Had a foot problem. Let's go with that. So again, we could see it happen, but that said, I don't exactly expect Greg Roman to be treating Herbert like he's Lamar Jackson, even if, again, he does impress on the ground. Go back and look at some of those moves he had against Titans, guys. It was crazy. Last thing, though, before we get to our win total, do you have a fun tight end trade you'd like to pitch for the Chargers, Dwain? Because spoiler, everyone, I don't exactly see anyone here to target at the moment. Yes, they added Tyler Conklin to the equation, but man, we still got Will Dissly there, and they also drafted Oronde Gadsden, someone where if you are in a tight end premium league and want to use like a 5th-round pick on, that's fine. He is the sort of talented pass catcher who, again, could make this even a more muddled situation. But if you have thoughts on the room, great, Dwain. Or if you want to talk about Michael Mayer being traded from the Raiders, I can get behind that.
Michael Mayer would be a good one. I think the other one would be Mark Andrews, right?
Yep.
I mean, Mark Andrews is going to be 29 years old. Harbaugh to Harbaugh. You've got a player that, we've talked about it whenever we've talked about Trey McBride and George Kittle. And whenever you look historically back at the tight ends that have broke fantasy football, they've been guys that can attack more down the field and still be high-end target earners. Usually the guys that are getting the deeper ADOTs in, they just don't get enough targets, and so they're just super touchdown dependent. But imagine when you can earn a lot of targets and you can do it further down the field, it unlocks this thing called touchdowns, which are really good for scoring fantasy football points. So Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, whenever he was really doing his thing at the peak of his game, they were all doing these things. Mark Andrews, 29 years old, career average depth of target of 10.5, was well over that last year. 24% targets per route run over his career. That was down a little bit last year, sharing more time with Isaiah Likely, was still coming back from the injury early in the year that he had suffered the year before. So I think when you look at Mark Andrews, man, he would also be a guy that I think fits what they want to do. They want to run the ball. They want to hit you with play action, let an athletic tight end get over the top of that, get over the top of that linebacker and in front of that safety that's now playing so deep in the league on those deep crossers, on those seams. And Andrews can really do that, man. He would be a perfect fit in this scheme. Would he get 90% route participation? I don't know, because they'd probably want to mix someone else in as a blocker some, but I think he would get to play enough that we would probably immediately project him as the number 2 target on the team behind McConkey. So I would say Mark Andrews, but man, I have no hate for Michael Mayer, so go off.
Mark Andrews, I'll give you that, number 1. I'll put Mayer number 2. Kyle Pitts, maybe it can work out. Noah Fant as well.
I had Kyle Pitts as a second option. Option. Yeah.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and let's get back to reality here for a second. With the Chargers win total sitting at just 9.5, I'm going to take the over, Dwain. I know this offensive line got exposed against the Texans. Maybe they weren't quite as good, throughout the year as some people gave them credit. But man, to see this defense, who, yes, you got Joey Bosa out of town and stuff, going to need to do their job as well. Number 1 ranked scoring defense though last year. I mean, I felt like last season was just going to be a year away from maybe being a year away for this rebuilding team, first year under Harbaugh. So to see what they were able to accomplish then, man, really was impressive to me. So I'm going to take over 9.5 wins. Again, Harbaugh in his NFL coaching career has won 13, 11, 12, 8, and most recently 11 games. I think he gets to double digits once again. What say you?
Yeah, man, Harbaugh's a grinder. It's tough. Like, I think 9.5, like Vegas is telling us something here. Obviously, we've got the Chiefs in the division. We've also got the Broncos, who we're going to be talking about, man. And they were already a great defense. They made more upgrades to their defense. They potentially injected some playmakers into their offense. You get Bo Nix going into year 2. He might progress. But still, if I've got to choose right now, who's the second best quarterback in this division behind Patrick Mahomes, it's easily Justin Herbert. Right. Yeah. By a mile, in my opinion. So as far as, just, what the NFL is looking for and winning NFL games, so give me the Chargers. I don't like that they lost Bosa, but, Bosa did miss quite a bit of time. They did get Khalil Mack back. He's starting to get up there a little bit in age, but, we already talked about it. Yeah. You add Omarion Hampton, who could be a difference maker on the ground that really fits the profile of what they want to do. So I'll go with the over as well, even though the 2 previous years were 5-win teams, even though they got to 11 last year. But I'm going to believe in Harbaugh just grinding out these close games in a way that helps you get over 9.5.
Dwain and I both expecting at least 10 wins. And speaking of 10, use code QB10 over at fantasylife.com. Get 10% off your Fantasy Life Plus subscription. Help the show, help the company, and help yourself win some fantasy football championships. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Like and subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. And otherwise, just have a great rest of your day. For Dwain, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.